Hi, and welcome to Real Clear Fetish Talks Real Clear Play, a podcast that deals with kink, sober life, and everything in between. This is the start of season 8. I'm very excited. I am now 40 years old, but when this comes out, it's like a month into that. So, yes, a new decade for me. So that's fantastic. This time, we're going to the States to talk to Steve. Hi, Steve.
Hello there, Ralph. Thank you for having me.
Of course, it's not a problem. How are we doing?
I'm doing great.
You're not in an area with a hurricane, are you?
This time last week I was, yes. I was in Sarasota, so I was impacted where I did lose power. Our airport's down because the terminal roof flew off. So we are recovering, but this has been the first couple days where I'm almost back to a routine, back into doing podcast interviews and podcasting of my own and stuff like that. So it's good to get back to real life.
Oh yeah, well, us watching it over here, it's scary stuff.
Yeah.
Where we have like it's a storm if a wheelie bin falls over,
Mhm.
let alone a whole roof of an airport.
Yeah.
So like with every episode I do four standard questions at the start, and then we'll just see where the conversation goes.
Yeah.
So what do you prefer I call you? Names, pronouns, and title.
My name is Steve, and then with my podcast go by Sober Steve, and then my pronouns are he, him, and don't have a official title. Depending on like the person I'm with, I'm in that age where if the guy's younger, they're calling me daddy, and if I'm younger, I'm calling them daddy. So it'll end like I'm boy at that point. So it really just depends on the person, the dynamics.
Depending on who stands in front of you. Yes.
Exactly.
I recognize that one very much for myself. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I got sober during the pandemic, so I had been drinking was my drug of choice. Once I started drinking, anything else sounds great and good fun to me, but that was what really destroyed my life. Growing up, though, I was a pretty late bloomer. I always loved rules. Like, I was a big rule follower, so I didn't drink because it was wrong and bad, and that's what grown-ups did. So I was like so excited to when I got old enough to drink. I remember like being fascinated about what that age would be because it seemed to be different for different people. But I remember at like a sleepover party, like trying alcohol in like fourth or fifth grade and thinking it tasted bad. So therefore it must be because I'm too young and it'll taste better in a couple of years when I'm old enough. It'll just magically taste better having like bathtub gin from your grandmother's basement. Like I didn't understand like the whole concept of it. So it just but like I wasn't fascinated enough to where I was going to break the rules because I knew it was wrong and I shouldn't be doing it. So I stayed away from it until like after prom, like in high school, and kind of these people like feeling othered and bullied for being a very flamboyant kid. My entire like school career, basically, I was then all of a sudden the life of the party where everyone was telling me like how much fun I was and how silly it was and where was this Steve the whole time and we love this Steve and when can you hang out again? And all of a sudden, like I was right at the end of saying goodbye to all these people forever who made my life hell for 4 years. I was finally accepted, but it also like I clung to that side of the night for like the longest time, but it was only like in my sobriety and doing like step work and things like that where I like forgot that like the second half of that night was like the guy I was with, like when we were hooking up, like I got messy and sloppy and then downright like cruel to him and like blacked out. I was blacked out at that point, but there were amends to be made from like my first blackout night drinking, and I still like woke up the next morning like I can't wait to do that again. And like from then on, it didn't matter what the rules were about drinking. Like I knew I needed to drink as much as I could, and
Yeah.
I was able to still like control it over like rules that I set up around like times and places for as long as I could. But COVID really was kind of, I think a lot of us like that had control, lost control because all these rules about like, well, you can't drink at the office. Like the office is your home now, but you can drink at home, and they don't notice if you're, what's in your coffee cup in the morning as long as you're still showing up to work and doing your job. So
Mhm.
all of a sudden, like all these safeguards that I had in place started falling apart at the same time as like as I was drinking more, the strain that it did on my marriage because at the time, like my husband and I were monogamous, but the first thing I would forget in my blackout was like the monogamy part of our marriage. And so I like black out and cheat on him. And it could only happen so many times before he was like, something's got to stop. And I had, like at that point, that would finally like admitted, like he had known that I had been drinking enough because he was married to me. But like I always was also very good at making excuses as to like, well, it was because I was on an empty stomach, or I was like, I would hide how much. So sometimes he was also just mystified as to how I was so drunk because he would have no idea how much I had like been secret drinking in addition to the public drinking.
Mm.
So like he knew things weren't adding up, but it was the first time like where I was like, I have a problem. So I tried and like started going to different 12-step meetings until I found one that worked. And like that kind of helped teach me that during that first like year how to be like a normal person again. But I also like knew real quickly that that wasn't the only answer for me. I had already been podcasting with my husband about movies and TV shows, and like no one listened, and we did everything wrong about podcasting possible. But it was like it was great for us and brought us together and something fun to do. And then it gave me the tools so that like when I got sober and I was trying to binge all these sober gay podcasters searching sober queer, sober this, and couldn't find much at the time, like 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, I was like, well, I know how to make one. So I started my podcast Gay A, and that was my chance to kind of connect with other people that might not necessarily, I mean, including some 12-step people. That's where especially I found a lot of my first guests, but then meeting people online from other steps, like other fellowship programs besides mine, which was based around alcohol, but also people who got sober using other programs or other ways, or like woke up and just stopped somehow. I don't know. It blows my mind because I need like sets of like again like rules. Like I need like do this, do this, do this. As long as I can follow my prescription of like how to function. Like I've learned what that is over the past 3.5 years of what I need to like be at my best self. But like I just love also hearing other perspectives. So I say like that's kind of helped keep me sober just as much as anything else.
Well, you've already answered the question, but I'll ask it anyway. Completely sober, clear-headed, or social drinker?
Completely sober, yes.
And you mentioned earlier that like with drinking, you would go on to the next bit, and that would just sound fun. So
Yes.
I see. I wasn't an alcoholic, but I was also very much like, oh, I'll do this now.
Hmm.
So
Yes.
it's kind of a little bit reverse to what our situations are, but similar.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I joke because I've learned like in recovering, doing different roundups and sober experiences and even like kinky experiences where there's sober people that like my people generally are CMA people, like they're meth heads. Like that's the people that I vibe with. But the first time in college when I was exposed to that drug, it was a very like upsetting, traumatic experience where I was exposed to it without knowing it was in my system. And then it was just it freaked me out enough to scare me, and like it takes a lot to scare me away from something, but like that was enough where I like after talking with so many other people, I'm like thank God it wasn't with like a hot guy or a hot group of guys with a positive experience, because I would have been like off to the races and like gimme more, because like that's what it was like with everything else. It was like the moment I started smoking weed, it was like I'll smoke all the weed I can get. If it was give me cocaine, everyone had to hide their cocaine from me in college. They learned real quickly because my solution was to do all of it. Like that's how it was with everything. But luckily, like in my experience, like the meth scared me enough away where that wasn't the same thing for me.
Oh God, I wish meth had scared me away, but no, it did not. Last question. What is clear play to you and why is it important?
Clear play to me not only is being like sober in the sex that you're having, but for me especially, like having developed more of like my kinky side and tapping into it in my sobriety, it's also the communication, like clear communication, because I oftentimes would use sex to disassociate and to shut down and detach from the real world.
Hmm.
And so here I've learned in my sobriety and like exploring my kinks how much I love like being connected to the person that I'm with, and just like having that energy exchange, like amplifying our energies together rather than it be like one of us just taking all the energy from the other. I mean, there's a time and a place for that as well. But like in general, I love it when we can kind of amplify each other's experiences by being so connected where I'm able to, I had so much shame around the type of sex I wanted to have where I wasn't even able to physically have it for so many years. But like now that I love that not only can I be having the sex, but I'm also not going to be ashamed of the sex that I'm having. I'll talk about the sex with like anyone who wants to listen to me talk about it, like because I feel like it's something that so many of us want to do or are doing but are afraid to talk about, that if people who are already loud by nature like me and you, like who want to like do podcasts or shows about it, like have people just get loud, and it makes someone who might be afraid or ashamed of it feel less shame.
I think one of the things for me, at least, I'm always been quite sex positive, and I think it's to do with my upbringing. Sex was never taboo in my house. My mom would rather have us come and ask things than being ashamed of it. And so I'm sure some people would think me and my mom's relationship is a bit relaxed, but she knows about the levers. You've seen my dog cage. It's not a big deal. And that makes it a lot easier to kind of explore and so on. So lockdown, and
Hmm.
then you say it started falling apart. So
Yeah.
up until that then, and up until that point, and it's actually something we probably haven't dived into the last episode. So you would call yourself a functioning alcoholic up until
I
that point?
I had been, yeah, I was to the point where like if you got close enough to me, you knew something was wrong, but I was very good at keeping the picture outside and the
Mm,
people at arm's length. As long as I was like at arm's length, my life looked perfect. Like, and that was very much the way that I was raised by my parents. You know, they might get like home from work and like tell my younger brother and I that we were pieces of shit, that they never wished they adopted us because we forgot to vacuum up after like the dog's shedding for the day. But at the same time, like when we went out, we were like the big smiley happy family where everything was perfect. And so that's like what was drilled into me, is like it didn't matter how dysfunctional it was inside your home or like what you were feeling. Like mom and dad could be fighting, you and your brother could be fighting, like the whole family could be at war with each other and like afraid to leave the bedrooms at night because of who might yell. But at the same time, like when we go out, we're all like lovey-dovey, being the perfect family. So that's when I was, in my alcoholism. It was very much like I had to I had to be in a relationship because like it helps having that kind of I would say accountability, but at that time it was like also like someone to kind of help like take care of me if I got sloppy, or like cover some of the holes that I couldn't take care of myself because I was blacking out left and right or drinking more than I should. But like it also like was about like getting the boyfriend to become the husband so that then we can get the house, so that we can get the kids, so that we can, the 2.5 kids, so that we can get this, so that we can have this perfect life where like almost, even though because like I was gay, I grew up in the age of like where Will and Grace was on TV, to the point where I got 8 different box sets of season 1 in college from different people who just didn't know what to give me as a gift, so they just got me Will and Grace. But like with that show, I was also like very raised by like the people around me that like if you were like Will, it was okay. Like if you were trying to find your husband to settle down to raise the family and like basically be straight, but like having sex with dudes and just swap out the wife for the husband, like it was going to be more acceptable than if you were dating around or like seeing multiple people or like being a little bit more flamboyant or like not having like a more traditional job like a lawyer, but being something like an actor, entertainer. So like I was raised where like that was bad. Like don't do that. That won't be accepted. As long as you look like Will, you're going to be accepted, but you can't look like Jack. And so that was very much what I was trying with my life subconsciously. But like I've worked through this like in sobriety and therapy and coaching and all of that. But that's very much what I was trying to do. And it was kind of shattered because the COVID happened right around the time that my husband and I were trying to adopt a child from the foster care system who was 17, and at the time like we didn't realize was like very mentally unwell, and like having her in our home during the trial period of like it became very clear that like it was not going to work out and wasn't healthy for any of us, but it was so unhealthy that like for me and him together we were like this is it, like we just are going to like put that off the table right now. But at that time, if my entire life was this timeline of what it should be like saying I can't do this, I can't do that. Like I won't do like the kinky sex. I won't go out to like circuit parties. I won't do clubs. I won't do this. I won't, because I'm trying to follow this like perfect trajectory of what my life would be like. And then all of a sudden it stops, like it cracks or it shatters at this road where like everything past it all of a sudden doesn't exist anymore, because it all kind of from there was based off of this adoption working out and us like being these dads and living this perfect American fantasy life. And so like after being like, oh, what do I do? I didn't want to figure out what I wanted to do. I just wanted to drink the pain away until I didn't feel anything. And so I did that for, it probably was like 3 to 6 months afterwards, where I was like every day. And it just was at work again, like I was working in a sales and marketing job at a senior living community like that was being built. So it's like from the ground up, and I'm selling $10,000 deposits for these seniors or their like loved ones to pick out these apartments, but like I'm taking them up and down the elevators that are 3 stories high, and I've been drinking all day long, and it's like a 4 o'clock tour. Like I must smell like the vodka or the whiskey that I've been drinking. Like there's no way now in sobriety that I
Mm,
know I didn't when I was taking up the elevator with these tours, with these clients, with my boss, with these regional directors. But no one said anything about it because I was making them stupid amounts of money. So like they didn't care. It was when I got sober and all of a sudden like I had to take a couple days off because I was like physically going through detoxes and like not able to focus on a conversation. And then like I all of a sudden wasn't the life of the party happy hour guy anymore. That all of a sudden they were like, oh, like that's when they started, like, if anything, like my sobriety was like a bad thing for them because it hurt their pockets and my
mm,
performance of what I was known for, like doing to make the money. But yeah, they were more than happy to kind of look the other way as long as everything was great. My husband was more than happy to look the other way as long as I was like keeping the story going as what long as things looked okay on the outside, like all these other people around me, as long as I kept going. But it got for me to the point where I was like waking up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, like not only like physically ill from like detox, but also just like mentally and emotionally like upset that I didn't have an aneurysm in my sleep and just like not wake up at all because I just didn't want to go through the cycle of spending the first hour of the morning like going through my phone being like, who did I call, who did I text, who did I DM, who did I message, like to say something, tiptoeing around my husband to figure out if I have to apologize for anything or if he even like not remembering what happened, like then like getting sick on the way to work and pretending it's like stomach problems and not a gallon of like liquor a day I'm drinking, and then saying I'm never going to do it ever again to like be doing it by the time I was done with my morning meetings at 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning. It just was like it got tired. It was like so similar like to my drinking career. Like it was fun for a while until it wasn't. Like in that
mm.
last bit, like when I said like screw the rules, screw the guidebook, like I'm just gonna drink as much as I want and like black out and whatever happens, happens, like and not care whether I lived or died, like it wasn't fun for very long. And so I'm like when finally my husband was like, you like something needs to change. I was so relieved that I was able to finally like because I was at the point again where I was like I wasn't actively suicidal, but I was like hoping to die, and no
Mm.
one around me was stopping me. And he was the first person to try and like stop me and say like, I'll listen, just like tell me. And I finally did, and thank God because here we are today.
Yeah, I think as the loved ones, it's always difficult to watch, and sometimes I think some loved ones, and I can't talk for your husband, of course, but you kind of also go in a little bit of denial about what's going on. You don't want to really face it. I have, I know of people where they're in relationships where one is not doing so well, and the other one is not aware of it, as far as I'm aware. That is crazy to me how they wouldn't notice. But then again, you are very quick to just turn a blind eye to the signs, or you won't quite don't want quite to believe it that it is an issue. So I'm assuming you've worked through all this with your husband now, and you're
Yes,
a lot
for
better.
sure. Yeah, the first like especially the first year was like about so much healing. The first 90 days even because part of my rock bottom like involved him catching like another bout of infidelity. Like there was a time of like healing where even though like we were married, I still wasn't having sex with him in early recovery. It was like 90 days to like somewhere between my third and fourth month of sobriety when
Mm.
we finally had sex together. And even that was like a big deal for me because it was the first time where like we had without drinking I had sex, but I had always been at least stoned or like
Yeah.
something. And so it was the first time that like I had sober sex with my husband in like our marriage, which is wild to think that I didn't realize I had a problem until like 8 years into it. But like it was a big deal, but like a lot of healing needed to be happening, not only in like that aspect of then like also like really taking like just like being just about me and him and healing us, but then also just I felt this like psychic change as they talk about in the rooms like pretty quickly where like between the podcast like holding my ass accountable where I was like
Mm.
I can't fuck up, people are watching now, but like also just like also like having my program and being like, wow, like I see all these people who like I want what they have and they're telling me how to get it and I'm going to do anything. Like, And I felt the change, but he had been with me for so many years where I was saying, I'll never do it again, I'll never do it again. I was the boy who cried wolf at that point. So I remember
Mhm.
there was also some friction like around the 3 to 6 month mark where I felt like I had like grown and I was catapulted into this like new plane of existence. And he was still like waiting for the relapse, like waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for things not to work out. And I was like, how do you not believe it? But like, of course, like now that I've also like gotten past it, like, and I'm out of the woods, I'm like, of course now, like I know that because like I'd done that to him so many times without the support and background and community that I was building. And I tried to do it on my own and I just could never do it. It was only when I connected with other people in other ways, like not just with the programs, but with the podcast like that. I was like, the connections, what for me has always been like what helps keep me sober more than reading or meditating. Like all of that is extra bonus work and like homework and like, or like, you know, the coursework to get the foundations laid. But like day to day, what keeps me sober is talking to another sober person.
Well, that like I don't do 12 step myself now, but
Mhm.
that's the power of the room. It's sitting in a room with, let's say, 20 complete strangers, and you have
Mhm.
something in common. That doesn't necessarily have to be a recovery room. That can be any room. If you mentioned earlier you did a movie podcast, you have a connection with your husband where you can sit and talk about movies. That's connection.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
at the end of the day, that's all we want is connection.
Yeah.
And it's just about finding the same wavelength with people. And that's like you say with the podcast, it keeps you level, it keeps you sane. It also keeps you accountable. Trust me, I feel very accountable doing this as well, because I've had some lovely interactions. I've done a couple of events since last season, and I do have people coming up to me, and I don't know, quite know what to do with it. So I'm just like,
So weird.
I know it's like I don't like the word celebrity because that is not what I am,
Hmm.
but people do know who I am,
Hmm.
which is wild to me because I'm just this little cisgendered white guy sitting with a microphone. How original, talking
Hmm.
about sex and being sober, and that's it. It's just a thing I started during COVID.
Yeah, but I mean, what you're doing is so huge because even for me, my first 2 years of sobriety was very much like me falling into like my old habits of trying to build the perfect life. I was just trying to build it around what being sober looked like to a lot of the like the majority of the people that I would see in the rooms. And like to that, it still was like very traditional and sex wasn't really talked about in a lot of the play like the meetings that I was going to or the spaces that I was finding online even until like I eventually found like a leather recovery groups and like a leather kink communities that had sober people. And I was like, oh my God, because like my first like sexual fantasy as like a kid was involved like me being like tied down and surrounded by gut dudes. And like that's still like right up there with like my top 10 types of fantasies I can come up with. Like but I was so afraid my entire like sexual adulthood, like in my addiction, to really explore that because like that was wrong in the same way I had all these rules about drinking to try and keep me under control. I had all these like rules about sex where I still ended up having sex with like hundreds of guys in my 20s, but I felt like it was okay because I was basically door dashing dick to my apartment like after I was wasted rather than going out to a bar and finding it that way. Like I don't know why, or like because it was like not wearing leather, but it was like I was already I had them walk in, I was already like face down, ass up, or like whatever was going on. Like I told myself like what I was doing was okay because it was like not kinky or like leather or like didn't look like the bad stuff on TV or that people look down on or judge. But like that was the stuff that I wanted. And so I just had a whole bunch of really crappy vanilla sex for years. And like that's what I thought like marriage was supposed to be like and everything even then. And then it was like only like after kind of realizing like 2.5 years into sobriety, I mean like I between like that with sex kind of hitting a dead end where I was like I needed more, but also just like trying to be the perfect sober person and be like, all right, I'm doing so much service, I resent it. Like, I thought that that was like the goal is to do like, if I'm doing service at 7 meetings, like 7 nights a week, like that's me winning at sobriety. If I have so many sponsees that I can't keep track of them, like if I'm doing all these, if I'm like doing service for this organization in New York City, that's like making me want to like shoot myself every single time I hear Facebook Messenger go off. Like, is that really what like the perfect sober person looks like? Like, that it wasn't for me. And like I realized like there were things that needed to change. Like I needed to like if I'm going to be living this second life, this second like the shot at life, because there's no way I should be alive right now if it wasn't for like a higher power looking out for me. Like it needs to be like my life the way that I want to live it, and like that
Mm.
involves like talking with my husband about like respectfully like opening up the marriage in a way where like he's comfortable with it, I'm comfortable with it, and we're communicating about it. And when he gives boundaries, like I respect them, which is like something I could never do if I wasn't sober, because like there are things that we compromise on that like I'm not like in love with, but I understand them, I respect them, but like things like respect go out the window if I have alcohol or drugs in my system, like because and it starts with myself. Like if I'm drinking or using drugs, like the respect for me goes. And so once it's gone for me, like how am I going to respect anyone else around me if I can't respect myself? And so being able to show up to like these situations and be able to say like these are my wants and needs, like not only with like my marriage, but also like building my life up to be like all these things that I was waiting for. Like, well, I'll do this one day. I'll join like a community that way. I'll start exercising this day or join the gym that day, or all these things that I was waiting for, I just started doing. And like in the past like year, almost like 10 to 12 months of doing that is like when I've had this kind of like second awakening of sobriety. And it's like really just started with like me telling my husband, like, I need to have kinky sex. And like from there, that confidence in the bedroom started happening outside the bedroom.
Well, that's fantastic.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people were like, when they, may I ask how old you are?
I am 38.
38. Oh, plenty of time. I do sometimes talk with people where they kind of go, oh, it's too late. We can't change what our sex life is now. I'm really curious,
Mhm.
but it's just not gonna happen. I'm just like, no, you can start whenever you want to. And it sounds to me the way you've talked about trying to uphold this perfection, and perfection like in a heteronormative way has just blocked stuff that was already there. Um, you can, my personal view is kind of be happy you didn't find kink in alcoholism because it's fucking difficult to split them. So in that aspect, it's a little bit easier for you. So when did you start exploring your kink after your sobriety? You said around like 2 years after, or?
Yeah, I would say that like I started going to leather and kink recovery meetings online, I would say a little over like a year and a half ago, sporadically, like very much like dipping my toe in, not going regularly. But it was about last October. So about like yeah, a year now, when I was like, I'm gonna go to this meeting regularly. I'm gonna share whether I want to or not. Like I'm gonna trade phone numbers. I'm gonna connect with people. I'm gonna follow them online. I'm gonna like start like doing my homework rather than just saying like I have kinky interests, but like actually like figure out what that looks like, and like making a list of like things I know I want to try, things like I know I don't want to try, things like I'll maybe try, and like start like then like as I'm like going out into like the real world, like trying to find people I can do those things with safely and like sanely, and having that consent where like we can try it. And like tend to just like for the longest time I had more success anytime I was traveling, especially because like you go to sober events, you're gonna find sober kinky people. You go to kinky events, you're gonna find kinky sober people, because like there's always like a little overlap when you're in one of these kind of areas. But being able to kind of find these safe places outside of my own backyard where I'm able to explore, where there's also like no fear of judgment of like what people online might think, because they won't see me on their grid, my friends and neighbors or all of that kind of stuff. Like doing that very early on gave me the chance where like now I was able to then like kind of manifest it more locally in a more sustainable situation where I'm able to have like the sex life that I've always dreamed of, at the same time as like starting to really explore what kink and leather and like all of that means to me, as well as just communication of just like talking about my wants and needs inside and outside of the bedroom, because I was always very submissive like in the bedroom and outside the bedroom. And like I've learned in my sobriety, like I can be dominant on both sides, and it's like really fun being able to like take what I'm learning in the bedroom and then be like talking about it outside the bedroom, not just like talking about it and educating, but also being able to be more dominant at work, or being, and when I talk, feeling more confident in what I'm talking about. Because, if you could, some of the things I'm doing in the bedroom, if I could do those behind closed doors, I could do things on the street, a lot easier, it feels like.
Oh, it's that is so true. And like gear does something as well. It changes your
Hmm.
posture, it changes your confidence. It's the feel of it. My main thing is leather, of course.
Yeah.
And I've had so many people kind of goes like, Ralph, your posture changes when you have leather on. I was like, yeah, it's heavy as hell. But no, it does. You kind of stand a bit taller. And I sometimes have a, like you say, you bring it into your workplace or so on, this confidence you sometimes have with doing kink. I sometimes struggle bringing that with me sometimes
Mhm.
because I can come off really confident when I'm out, but actually not so confident out of gear. So it's nice to see
Yeah.
that you can kind of merge the two.
It helped me a lot because like around that same time that I started like getting kinky, I also like started just like getting into fitness and exercising and moving. But like it was when I started being able to like kind of lift or move or push around like 120, 140 pounds, and I kind of like in my mind a light bulb went off where I was like, just pretend it's a twink. All of a sudden I was like, I moved it up and I was like, now I was like, I want to get strong enough where I could do it with like muscle daddies. And like now I'm up to like the 200. So it's like that was like for me almost like I kind of equated like the two things together of like the motivation of like what I was doing in the bedroom like to what I was doing at the gym of like with the pounds, and it was just kind of funny the way that that worked, but it was motivating for me for a while, or just like thinking about like if I could do this in the bedroom I could do this at the gym, or like on the flip side, like as I was getting more confident in my physical strength, like it made a lot of the things that I'd always like fantasized about doing but maybe not have been physically capable of doing a lot easier to do now that I'm more in shape. So it's been a lot of fun, kind of seeing those two kind of evolve together too.
Yeah, I'm having the strength to sometimes as like as a dominant, it
Mhm.
can be quite difficult because I don't like brat behavior. So a brat likes to fight back. I
Mhm.
don't have a lot of physical strength, so I was
Mhm.
like, I don't want a brat because I wouldn't be able to fight them off, and that's not a good look for a top.
Yeah, I've learned that like about switching is like something I've really found to enjoy when I find like a guy where we can kind of bounce off, where I can be dominant and submissive, or kind of have that flip or that mix of both, which has been fun because even like out in the streets, like before I discovered leather and kink, just like being truly versatile and enjoying both of those experiences, it's very hard because anyone online I've learned like who says they're versatile, that's like code for like bottom 90% of the time, like top 10% of the time. So like finding like the true 50-50 split, like it seems to almost like be easier in like the leather and kink community, just because people seem to be more open to more experiences sexually anyway. Like and again, it very much is like about that kind of connection that you can build with someone as well, where I'll do things with someone like I'm vibing with that I normally wouldn't consider. I had never like even entertained or flirted with the idea of being fisted before, but then like, I have like a really hot daddy like over me with 4 fingers deep, and he's asking me, have you ever thought about it? And I was like, not until now in this way. It will shift when you're with the right person, the right environment. And like, while I haven't gotten there yet, like now that's like on my maybe list, when before it wasn't, because like the right person brought it up at the right time in that right situation, and all of a sudden something opened like up in me, like physically and literally, but
I
like
was
I
about to
guess,
say
but like
literally, yes.
yeah, literally. But like, you never know what you're open to trying. Like for me at least, like I've learned in my real life, I had so many rules about what you can and can't do, and that translated to what I can and can't do sexually. That part of this like new version of me is like sexually, I don't have like these rules of what I can and can't do. I have like probably not, maybe not like, but there's like always going to be room for compromise or room for me to be surprised, because same thing with my life. As long as I'm open to be wrong, open to something new happening, it's going to be a more exciting ride.
Like when it comes to kink, it's just exploring. It's finding out
Yeah.
what works and ticks with you, and I recognize the kid in the candy store in you,
Yeah.
from when
I'm very much.
I started when I was 22, so I'm
Mhm.
old hat now. But it is that like lust for it. It's like I have to try everything.
Mhm.
Why limit myself? And that's amazing. And it's also, I hate being cheesy, but it is that gift of sobriety and clearness and being present and
Mhm.
wanting to do these things. So it's just so important. And I'm so happy that you share your experiences on your podcast. So tell me a little bit about the podcast you do.
Sure. Yeah, my podcast is called Gay A, which I thought was hysterical when I got sober because it's a pun on AA, but gay. But I also realized it makes it like very hard to find. And like also if you don't get it, you can never get it. Like it's the full title now is Gay A, the queer sober hero show. So like searching queer and sober helps you find it a lot easier. But it's a weekly podcast, it has been coming out since my 90th day of sobriety. Like I've had over 200 episodes now. So if you
Oh,
love a good
wow.
binge, it's there for you. Every single week, it's a mix of interviews as well as topics. So I try and when I have a new guest come on, I'll have them share their experience, strength, and hope for like 10, 15 minutes, and I'll ask them questions about it, kind of that come out of the conversation.
Mm,
And then I'll also, the people who like are really engaging, but also like engaging during the episode, the listeners love them, and then they engage like afterwards with sharing and stuff like that, will oftentimes like come back on for like topic episodes where they're like, I want to talk about this topic or that topic. So that's a lot where I got into a lot of sex, dating, relationships, kink, that type of stuff comes up because it's, people come on and they're like, okay, I've already done the general, like, here's how I got sober and here's my life today. What do we want to talk about next? And that's something that a lot of people like really need to hear about. And there's room for different perspectives on it, the same way that there's like, I also love that, like, it's the range of queer people that I get. So it's, not only just gay men, but it's I have trans people and lesbians, and I always try and make sure that like my guests are as rainbow and diverse as our community is to kind
mm.
of represent that. When I got sober, like the purpose of that podcast, and I try and always kind of tell people like we paint out like you can go through traumatic shit. Like when you share what happened, like don't skip over the dark stuff because we've all gotten through it. But like the main focus of my show is like about the positive, amazing stuff that's going on today in our lives. That's why it's the Sober Hero Show, is because like I thought that my life would be over when I got sober. That's why I put it off for so long, is because I thought it was game over, like you'd never have fun again. But I'm having more fun than I ever had before. I'm having better sex than I've ever had before. I have like a healthier marriage than I've ever had before, healthier friendships, like in a community. Like my life is 1,000 times better in sobriety than it ever was drinking. And it's like not even me pretending anymore. It's like authentically better. And like that's just like a gift of being sober. But I try and like show that to people that if you can find my podcast before early in sobriety, like hang in there. And if you fall, like if you relapse, like I try and also make sure at least like half of my guests have like relapse as part of their story because it's not part of mine yet, but it's not part of mine yet in part because of all my guests that are constantly reminding me that like it's not better out there, girl. Like don't do it. But also like at least they also have given me the strength where I also do know that if it ever does happen, I'll just like come back as soon as I can because like the longer that I'm out, it gets harder as well because we who knows what might happen. So
Mm.
I've gotten like so much strength from my guests across the different communities that it helps kind of show me other parts of myself along the way.
I do find sometimes when I talk to people in early recovery, it is like it's a powerful reminder of where I was at, and I don't want to go back to that. Have I had wobbles? Absolutely, and I've been quite honest about them. And around like clean time birthdays, it's tricky. So it's just keeping yourself accountable and speaking what's in your head. That's so important when you want to keep sober, clear-headed, and happy, because there is no light without the dark. And I can definitely look back and some of the really dark situations and kind of like, well, that's ridiculous. Why would I do that? You kind of have to have a sense of humor about it, because some of the situations I put myself in, oh my God, it's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, I try and just like look at everything with humor because like it's so fucked up some of it that if you're not like laughing, you're gonna cry. And like I'm the type where I was like I've always thought laughter was like an easier way to deal with things than crying. It's partly deflecting, but also just like in general, like I'm like, how could like some of the things I look back on, it's just like I must be an alcoholic and like it must be like a brain thing because like I'm so smart in so many other ways. Like but then when it comes to like alcohol, when it comes to drugs, like I did some of the stupidest, and like even at times like alcohol, drugs, and like sex and like kind of the trio together, like I did some of the stupidest, most like fucked up shit that no sane person like sane, whatever that looks like, would ever do. And like, but then like when I'm like, but now like I'm sober, I would never do that. And I'm like, but like even then I was like, I thought that it was fine the next morning, like clear-headed, or but it was like I wasn't clear-headed because I was still like an alcoholic that wasn't dealing with my shit. So it's just
Mm.
been great being able to deal with the stuff that comes up. Because one thing like I thought when I got sober was that all of a sudden like nothing bad would ever happen again. And I've learned that that also doesn't happen. Like that's also not true. And just to keep going even when things do go wrong or you get curveballs or hurricanes happen.
Well, you just had quite a few hurricanes in the state.
Hmm.
Quite scary stuff. It's 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 just important to be honest where you're at and what works and so on. I always kind of say to people, it's like there is the relapsing of using drugs or alcohol, but you can also mentally relapse. You can get into old patterns or old fault ways, or your brain kind of starts telling you stories. And I've definitely, in that way, I've relapsed a couple of times in the last seven
Hmm.
years. And that's where honesty is important. You kind of go, okay, this is what I've done. This is how it made me feel. This is how I want to move on from it. And what do I learn from it? And that's important. A lot of people get really ashamed if they've engaged in not necessarily the action of full relapse, but
Hmm.
just engaged in some of those old behaviors. And it's just like you mentioned earlier, it's not about perfection. It's
Yeah.
just about being happy and then leave the shit behind. It's just much easier.
I mean, I've definitely had peaks and valleys in my sobriety where thank God for batching content where I'm able to interview and like really work a program real hard with like 8 or 9 awesome interviews because then like if I do disconnect and isolate for a month and fall into some of that like stinking thinking that like it's gonna get me in trouble, like someone will snap me out of it and like but like at the same time like I've been able to still have my content be consistent even if my sobriety hasn't always been as great as it seems like on the outside. And again, that's like my perfectionist thing coming in that I like have to also feel comfortable now that I've built this community, like when I struggle to also not only be the guy cheering everyone else on, but also be able to say like I am struggling, help me. And I haven't gotten there yet, but like one day I know that that's a goal that I need to work towards because yeah, it's hard for me to admit when I need help or when I'm struggling. And that's why like during the hurricane, like I just took the week off from social media rather than like even saying anything because I didn't want to say anything sad or bad. So I
Yeah.
guess, even in sobriety, we still are like, I know what I'm doing isn't the healthiest behavior, but I still find myself doing it if I'm not aware of it.
I think it's important acknowledging it that it does happen and it's not all perfection and it's not all about figuring everything out in one go. That comes down the line. So since becoming kinky, so what's your favorite piece of gear and what is the thing that surprised you the most?
I would say my favorite piece of gear is what I'm wearing right now. I got it from Mr. S Leather, so it's my first like real like leather piece that wasn't like purchased off of Amazon, where it can like pass the sniff test at when I go to like Leather Pride in Orlando, where they know it won't be basically the Amazon Basics version of leather. So it's definitely the piece that I wore for this. And I would say it was just. I learned like early on in sobriety that like when I didn't have to worry about like whiskey dick that I am a pretty good top as well. But like it was like I think it was like the in exploring my kink that like learning that I can be dominant was like it was like very surprising for me because my first time like going through step work like, even like real like my biggest fears were like how dominant, like what I viewed as dominant, like traits like dominant, what I would consider like I was afraid of how dominant I could get, like that I could raise my voice, that I could get angry at times, that I could get heat, like all these like feelings that I tried like associated with dominance that like weren't dominance. They were like toxic behaviors that I just like got mixed in from the way that I was raised. But
Mm,
like having to separate that and realize like that I can be dominant without having to be those bad negative things and that I like it and it's fun and like if I'm with someone who like wants it, it's like really, really fun. And that was just surprising because I very much had always been, very submissive, as like little sub Steve. And all of a sudden now, like my two play partners, I'm the dominant like top like 80 to 90% of the time. And it's again, like I'm having like the best time of my life right now with it. So it's just like a big
if
change from where I was a year or two ago.
I was about to say, if you're listening to the podcast, you won't be able to see it, but if you're watching, you can see a little twinkle in Steve's eye when he's talking about dominating, which is absolutely lovely, because that is also the twinkle I get, because It's the weird thing is I would never categorize myself as being an alpha kind of type. I'm probably more beta, really, if I'm honest.
Mhm.
Um, so being the dominant in the bedroom is this reversed of who I actually am in real life, and that's why I enjoy it. Also, I think it's a little bit of a revenge on all the bullies in my school, to be honest.
Yeah, but like I also I love that I'm able to like have that twinkle in my eye and like be present right now because like my one partner has more leather and kink experience than me. But even like the other day they were like, "You're making me feel like I'm like a young kid who's like good at sex again," like because we're able to like bounce off of each other and enjoy it like that. So, but that's the thing is like I've learned in sobriety and especially with leather and kink, like my favorite part of like these kink scenes is like after like not only like working it out before and with the communication but just like that afterwards you can kind of like laugh about her, like have like that is fun. Like I always enjoyed fun sex, like, and I've been in so many encounters where someone would like be turned off by the fact that I like might giggle or laugh about something, but I'm like, at the end of the day, like some of the shit that we're doing in the bedroom is like really freaky and like really awkward and really uncomfortable. And if you're jabbing it in at the wrong angle, like if I want to giggle a little bit to deal with the humor, like if I'm, if there's a fumble here or there's something awkward, like a little comic relief shouldn't be like a game over turn off. And so I love that like in sobriety a lot, and especially with kinky sober sex, that like a lot of the people that I'm having sex with also agree that like sex should be fun. Like all
Yeah.
of this should be fun, even if we get to like, even if we're pretending to be really dominant and butch for like the scene that we're in, and like when I'm done with it, I can go back to being like a little flamboyant, not to worry about like what they're going to think of me because there's the difference between like who I am and like as a person, like what I am bringing to the bedroom at times. And it's been really fun kind of exploring that.
It's those dark and light nuances of one's personality and what find out you're into and what it can bring up emotionally and some of it can be really healing. I've now found out in the last year or so, I was diagnosed with ADHD like 3 years ago, and I found out as a submissive, my brain goes quiet.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, who needs Ritalin? I'll
Yeah.
just be at someone's boots. Much
Hmm.
easier.
Well, there you go. Yeah. And see, I've been with my ADHD always very like in tune with that side of things, but there's just like also something like I've known even like before exploring kink full well, I've had partners where I'm like, spank me, spank me. I always knew I liked being spanked, but it was like now that like I've dealt with the whole idea of like if someone is wanting me to spank them and they're consenting and we learn how hard is too hard and this and that, like that I love like the impact play of doing that to someone else as well, which is something that like I would have been terrified for, like had I not, because I was always like afraid, like, well, what if the what ifs of like, what if I hurt someone? But like now that I've learned, I couldn't do that when I was like drinking because you didn't have that communication. But now that I can have that communication and work it out, and I can explore it safely, I love that type of stuff. And again, it was like a surprise that I flipped what I was expecting or what I've been used to in sobriety. But it's a beauty of being able to be clear and communicate with my partners.
Just to take a complete U-turn, you mentioned your failed movie podcast earlier in
Mhm.
the episode. I'm a massive movie buff.
It
So
still is up. I pay the $5 a month to keep, it's called A Lifetime of Happiness. And again, like the title doesn't even tell you it's about movies. No one could find it. And also like every week was a completely different genre. So like you have to like really uniquely love what we love specifically. It's but like but again we did make it like 150 almost 200 episodes. So like people can go through it now and we'll get emails still from Buzzsprout being like you got 50 downloads because someone found like 50 movies of the 150 that were kind of there because we do like a lot of horror things like that where they'll find chunks and sections, but it is very ADHD, especially since it was two different personalities where like I choose a movie, he'd choose a movie. So you could tell that there was a battle of wills at times.
so is your genre horror? Is that what you like?
Both of us like bond over our love of horror. We love everything horror. We do the horror theme parks. We do like right now we're loving Dracula. We love like anything scary, spooky. We love that. But I my stuff I've always I'm born in 86, so a lot of my stuff that like if I call it a classic, it's from like the 90s or aughts, and if he calls it a classic, and that he's in his like mid 40s, it's from like the early 80s or late 70s, and so we kind of have that kind of you'll see like a lot of like cuts from like the 80s where it was like my first time being exposed to this movie very much so, or me showing him something from the 2000s where he's like, I'm so glad I missed this. So it was some of these movies were acts of love for the other, but then also some we truly love together. So it's always a fun blend.
I guess like as more horror fans, it's we also get a little bit off on being scared, and that's
Mhm.
part of kink as well. And also, it makes a hell of a lot of easier to find a costume for Halloween
Yes.
in gear.
Although like I love all of that, like mixing my gear with the Halloween stuff. My husband's like, that's the cheating Halloween thing ever. So now, especially now that I'm in more shape this year, I like a joke that I'm gonna go through his closet and just do like the 2 weeks leading up to Halloween, just like pictures of me in my costumes with just like a mask and a harness. And he's like, that's not a costume. You need like makeup, you need accessories. I was like, I could just wear a harness and a mask. And he's like, that's not a real costume. And I said, we'll see what my followers think.
It's almost the gay version of the white girl's bunny suit.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm doing next week. I'm going to a birthday and it's a Halloween birthday. So I'm doing big boots, red boiler suit, red eye contact lenses, and probably some rubber. And
I
perfect.
mean, being new to kink, I'm learning that it's fucking expensive leather. So you got to get that mileage out of it. If we can at least use it for Halloween once a year, give us the pass, please, because we invest in enough where we don't need to go out and buy another costume if we're spending money on leather.
So what is your favorite horror movie as we're on the topic?
My favorite horror franchise is the Scream movies. Like all of the Scream movies I love, I would say for sure.
We can bin the last one, to be honest, but never mind. That's my view on it. Oh, I hated it. Absolutely hated it. But my favorite is A Nightmare on Elm Street. Um,
Oh, yes, that's also good. I love the first one, especially.
I literally just got it on 4K disc, so that will be
Mhm.
watching for this weekend, I think.
And then Chucky, I fell in love with more with the TV show, kind of putting all the movies together. I'm so upset that it was canceled after the third season.
Yeah.
But like, I have a new love of the movies after watching the show for sure as well.
Oh, the show is so great. It's made by gay man and it's so queer coded. Sometimes not so queer coded.
Not very coded at
It's
all, which is
very,
even
very
better.
queer.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it. And they kind of have this villain character that is actually quite woke when it comes to the LGBT stuff. And it's like, oh, I just like killing people, but I'm not a monster. So it's very important to have like representation. And I love like the horror and crossovers with LGBT. There's been so much of it. It's like the New York season of American Horror Story was just it was I thought it was art. I thought it was so beautifully done. It was horror, it was kink. You can't go wrong with Russell Tovey with a mustache. And it was just so good. And it was also beautifully done around the AIDS crisis. I thought it was like a perfect season.
I enjoyed the beginning part of the season. The ending was just a little too cerebral for me, but I like my slashers a little more slashery, I guess.
I'll put Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 on for you.
All right, sounds good. It's a date.
But we're coming to the end of the episode. It's absolutely been a joy to have you on. If there's any piece of advice you would give to someone in early recovery, what would it be?
I would say that it's never too late to try something new. I certainly, especially in early recovery, take time to heal. It like I'm glad that I took that first year to really kind of like learn how to function as a normal human because I didn't know how to do that before. I grew up being like thinking everyone got the handbook of like how to be a normal person the day that I was like sick with mono in school. Like I didn't get it, but like after that, like challenge yourself because I thought sobriety and about life in general was about building a comfortable life. I learned, especially like through kink, like being challenged to be uncomfortable through kink, that like that same being uncomfortable a little bit in real life as well, like pushing yourself being a little afraid but doing it anyway. And like if you're finding yourself like in this kind of circle, finding something to push yourself out so that you keep moving forward, that's been something that like I had never explored so much of my sexuality until my sobriety. And even then it took me some time into sobriety to have the confidence to be able to actually go for it. But I like now that I have all these years ahead of me, I have plenty of time to make up for lost time, and I will, trust me. But like it's not just the lessons that I've learned in the bedroom, but like taking that outside to be like, always push yourself. Like, don't get into a rut, don't get into a routine, because I thought that that was going to be the definition of a perfect life. And my perfect life is always moving forward now, always figuring out what my next kind of competition or obstacle or marathon or thing I'm going to do to kind of challenge myself, because that's when I'm doing better. If I get bored, I get lazy, and then I get complacent, and then my sobriety is at risk. So I'd much rather keep moving forward.
Fantastic. And if anyone's listened or watched and they connected with something you said, where can they get a hold of you?
You can find a whole bunch more of me and my guests on my show, Gay A Podcast. So that's on Instagram as well as on all podcast players at Gay A Podcast. And then I try and keep that just to more just sobriety. If you want more of just me as a person, I'm also at Just Steve SRQ. That's the airport code for Sarasota. So it's at Just Steve SRQ for my personal page. That's where I'll do more like my leather stuff and my little slutty stories and stuff.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And that was Steve, and this was the first episode of season 8, and it's been absolute joy to talk to about his journey into sobriety and his journey into kinkness. And I'm so excited for what's going to happen, and hopefully I'll see him sometime over in America when I get over there. But until then, stay kinky, stay sober, and play safe. Bye.